Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
Hello, this is an e-commerce conversation from Practical E-Commerce, and I am Armando Roggio. Now, mobile devices are ubiquitous. Personally, I don't go anywhere without mine, and I'll bet you have a smartphone with you right now. In fact, you may even be listening to this e-commerce conversation podcast on a mobile device. The question then is, are you doing everything you can or everything you can do to connect to shoppers on mobile? Because according to a survey from Quick, 66% of respondents rank mobile messaging, SMS, as their preferred channel for contacting a company. And some 64% of respondents to that same Quick survey want to use messaging to make a purchase. So in this conversation, I will be speaking with Chris Albro. Chris heads up enterprise sales for Quick, a company that provides these kinds of messaging services. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Armando. Appreciate it. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad you're here. And Chris, why don't you start by telling us something about yourself, your career, and then tell us a little about your company.
Yeah, absolutely. So both myself and the company are based out of Bozeman, Montana, a growing, we'll call it the Silicon Valley of the Rockies.
Okay.
Although I imagine there are numerous cities trying to lay claim to that title. But I've been in Bozeman about 15 years now. And all of those years I've spent in the enterprise software customer experience space in a variety of roles, ranging from sales, which is my current capacity, but I've worked in professional services, implementation, pre-sales support, customer success, et cetera. And that experience is kind of common to the Quick DNA. We're a young company, startup, as you mentioned, about 3 years old, but cumulatively across the management team, not to date ourselves, we're well over the century mark in terms of direct hands-on experience in the enterprise software customer experience space, meaning we've built, deployed, sold, supported, and enabled customers on enterprise class platforms previously in our careers, which is a unique thing in the software startup space.
Well, and all of that sums up for, hopefully, you're going to know what you're talking about when I ask you these questions about mobile messaging. Isn't that right?
I sure hope so.
All right. So when I think about mobile messaging, I really think about, SMS or text messaging. How would you define mobile messaging as a category?
That's a great question. There's two key words in there, obviously, mobile and messaging. The messaging part, I think your definition is what most people would consider as messaging, SMS and texting and MMS. The mobile part of it is where it gets really interesting. Mobile device users, if you will, operate differently than people sitting at a desktop computer and or a landline phone. They are mobile. And the result of that in terms of the communication that happens on those devices is that it's asynchronous in nature. The story I always tell is that, I wake up in the morning and I start messaging with people that are maybe in a more advanced time zone than myself. Then I make myself a cup of coffee. Maybe I make my kids breakfast. During that time, I'm not looking at my mobile phone. And by the time I go back to my mobile phone, there's a pile of inbound messages there, and then I take some time and respond to those messages. And those conversations might take hours to conclude, but they're happening in 8 and 10-second increments that fit our lifestyle patterns. And that's where mobile messaging is inherently unique. SMS, MMS, texting, as people know it, is the most prolific form of mobile messaging. But there are apps in certain geographies or demographics that have come to play an important role for the people in those geographies and demographics. Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, WeChat, Line in Japan, KakaoTalk in Korea. It's prolific, the explosion of these things. The most recent, coming from some of the bigger players in the market.
So our listeners, the folks listening to this podcast, are in the e-commerce business. They may be retailers, they could be B2B. So I think sometimes top of mind for them is marketing, driving sales. What are some of the ways that digital messaging can be used to drive sales in an e-commerce context?
That's a really good question. So the world of mobile messaging is rapidly emerging in this space, and probably the most typical way that people think of using mobile messaging or messaging, SMS in particular, for in a sales capacity is in the kind of pure outbound marketing message way, right? So I'm sending a coupon code or a promotion code out through SMS. And the reason that's become so popular is because text messages have something like a 98+% read rate.
Wow.
If you compare that to the read rate of email, for example, it's at the other end of the spectrum, suffice it to say. I mean, most people operate like I do. I have an email address that I used for online shopping, and I basically don't worry about unchecking all of the promotional material boxes when I place an order. I just place an order and I put this email address in, and I never check that email address. And I imagine there's some great coupon codes in there, but I'll never go read those messages. And most people operate that way. In fact, I hired a person recently and had to text them the offer letter because they don't have an email address.
Wow.
And so the difference is text messages get read. Hence, it's a popular channel to do some marketing work. There are more advanced ways, right? With some of the brand specific messaging apps. So, for example, Facebook ads, using those as promotions and turning those into Facebook Messenger conversations. That's a trend that we expect will continue. Putting a text us link in your Google AdWords results and allowing somebody on a mobile device rather than having to place a phone call or go to your website to start the buyer journey. Mm-hmm. You can just text us from that Google ad and not text us, but text the brand, literally. And then you obviously need a tool for your inbound agents to handle that volume of conversations. And that's an inherently different aspect about the messaging world, is that it's already prolific in the end user space. And so any brand that's contemplating turning on messaging needs to be able to operate at a certain scale, because the end user pull-through rate in messaging is going to happen much more quickly than it did with like live chat or email, for example. Now, there's a whole other aspect to the sales side, which is once you've started the conversation, how do you better assist that buyer in their journey? And imagine yourself, if you will, standing in your garage trying to repair something, or maybe even standing in a store trying to buy something and you want support. There isn't a person that I know that would know how to attach a picture to a desktop live chat session. Everybody I know would know how to take a picture of the thing that they're trying to figure out and send that in and say, can you help me with this purchase? Everybody would know how to do that via text messaging. And so further into the buyer journey, there's an incredible support opportunity, and our customers see an improvement of upwards of 30% conversion for mobile customers when they support people on that device natively. Now, 30% is a great result when you layer it on top of the fact that some brands that we talk to now see more than 50% of their e-commerce revenue happening on a mobile device. You're starting to talk about a really big lever to pull to improve results.
So walk me through what that sort of, I don't know what else to call it, but like text-aided sales process might look like.
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's hypothetically say I'm trying to self-install either a home security system or a home entertainment system, something that's relatively complex, and I'm a newbie at this. I've got some of the components that I need, but there's other components that I know that I need to pick up in order for this to be a successful installation. I could go to a website and try and figure that out myself. I've got to go get my laptop computer or turn on my desktop computer and go to the website and start the chat session or what have you, place the phone call. That's kind of the traditional way of operating. The mobile messaging way of supporting that buyer journey is I'm standing there and I kind of can visualize myself wrapped in wires from this installation, needing support, not knowing which components I might need. And I can just start texting with an agent or an assistant from the brand, right? And I can start a conversation with them, maybe even exchange some pictures rather than having to type the serial number of the equipment I have. I can just take a picture of the serial number label on the back of something, and the agent then can much more expeditiously help me find the right complementary components to successfully help me install what I'm working on, and then go ahead and complete that order for me. And the way that would work is I'd have the messaging conversation and say, here's what I'm trying to do. The agent from the brand would help me figure out what else I need to complete my project. And they can actually build a shopping cart for me on their end, and then SMS me the link to that shopping cart. And all I've got to do on my mobile phone, and everybody knows how to do this, is click on that link. It takes me over to a secure mobile web page, and I can confirm the contents of the shopping cart, the price point, and then go ahead and complete the purchase in a secure manner using mobile web technology. It all happens right there in the context of my project. I don't need to stop what I'm doing and go to my laptop or my desktop, or stop what I'm doing and make a phone call, which is like this clunky, synchronous 20-minute conversation.
I understand that. One of the things that comes into my mind as I'm thinking about this consumer, surrounded in cables, trying to figure out how to hook something up. How would the consumer know that messaging was even an option? I mean, are we talking about, okay, I'm on my mobile and I go to the website, and then you're somehow merchandising the fact that you've got a mobile texting or chat capability, or how are you communicating that in your marketing? And then the follow-up to that question, so I'm going to give you two at once. You mentioned about a 30% increase in sales when you had this text option. Again, I'm assuming that follows from them knowing that they can actually use text to communicate with me.
Yeah, exactly. So here's the beautiful thing about implementing texting. I mean, there's an array of options here, and I'll cover a couple of them that are most common. But just putting a text us link, a clickable text us link on a mobile web page entails exactly 24 characters of code, 10 of which are the phone number to which the text is going to be sent. That 24 characters of code creates a clickable link, and you can put a label on that, like text us for help or whatever you want. And when a mobile browser it receives that click, it's inherent in the browser to be able to open the native messaging app on that device, whether it's an iPhone, Android device, or what have you. And so by clicking on that link, it will natively take the user over to their native messaging app where they can start a texting conversation. And everybody knows how to do the proverbial double tap to go back and forth between applications. And so I can stay on the web page while I'm in my conversation and flip back and forth easily between the messaging conversation in my native messaging app and the web page from which I originated. Here's the beauty of this. Unlike mobile chat that happens like in-app or in a web page, the device manufacturers have built all of the things that I need in order to communicate: keyboard controls, camera controls, et cetera. Apple, other manufacturers provide those natively on their devices. And so you don't need to get your IT team to write custom keyboard controls to enable mobile chat, right? Which is a huge investment for companies today. Okay, so that's how do we initiate a texting conversation. 24 characters of code on the mobile web page, that's the easiest way. If you have an IVR, for example, maybe some of your customers call in to get shopping support. You can also play a message in the IVR that says, hey, we're busy right now, but if you'd prefer text messaging, we can help immediately. Press 1 to use text messaging. Any IVR that's capable of making an API call, which in today's world is most of them, can then transfer that conversation over to the Quick platform, and we can set up a two-way messaging conversation between the agent that's going to help with that purchase and the customer on the other end. That allows the customer to disconnect from the call, get on with their life, but also complete the task they set out to complete.
Right. And just for all of our listeners, IVR, that's interactive voice response, correct?
That's correct. It is the scripted dialogue that happens when you call almost any company's 1-800 number today. That's correct.
So talk to me a little bit about, obviously you guys are in the business of providing a service around this, but just sort of agnostic of services, what sort of infrastructure is necessary to be able to respond to customer interactions via text?
That's a good question. So let me maybe take a couple of different lenses at that. I'll answer it first under the construct of a very formal definition for infrastructure, which is what technology infrastructure do brands need in order to support this. The short answer is none. Much of technology today is being delivered in a software as a service or platform as a service and as a service model in effect. And so our software is no different. We provide it as a service, which means that we provide all of the underlying infrastructure, including the telephone numbers that you might need to SMS enable. We connect to the gateways. We handle all of the underlying fees associated with getting messages on and off the carrier networks, et cetera. And so from a pure infrastructure perspective, there's nothing additional needed. Our software is rendered in the context of a web browser that already exists on the customer service agent's computer in their environment today. Okay, so in the narrowest definition of the term infrastructure, nothing is needed. In the broader sense of the term, again, we have to keep in mind that messaging is already live in the wild and happening at enormous scale. And so if I broaden the definition of infrastructure to mean what are the tools that a brand would need to be successful in the messaging space, the answer is a little bit different. And the tools that agents and brands will need to be successful are things like routing and queuing engines, SLA management, agent statuses, sophisticated capabilities around handling spam and TCPA compliance, a robust set of APIs to integrate with other systems that the agents might need access to or customers might need access to in order to have a successful interaction. And so, when we go back to the start of our conversation where you asked me to introduce myself and the Quick brand, this is where our enterprise experience starts to help us differentiate a bit in that we've built and again sold, supported, implemented enterprise class platforms before. And so we knew going into the messaging space, the tools, the infrastructure that brands would need to be successful. And we went ahead and built those in from day one, and all of our customers get the benefit of those things.
Makes sense. And just because we are talking about a broad sort of audience of podcasters, there's actually several ways that you could go about this. You mentioned your own service, that's what you guys do. You specialize in that. Somebody could build a lot of those services themselves, et cetera. And I suppose at the very smallest level, you could, buy an iPhone and let everything come into that. But I want to take this conversation in a little bit different direction. We talked about how you might market and push things, talked about sort of this aided shopping experience. Is there also a place for this sort of messaging in the checkout process? So when I go in and I make a purchase, and instead of having a confirmation and shipping notice sent to me via email, is there a way to do that via SMS, and there's some advantage to that?
Absolutely. Some of our larger retail e-commerce customers started their experiment or their experience in the messaging space with that exact use case. It's not a secret that in the retail e-commerce consumer products industries that what is the status of my order is a massive driver of calls into the customer service department or the contact center. And by deflecting those calls, you can save a brand a considerable amount of money and also improve the end user experience, the customer experience. And so, like I mentioned, several of our larger brands, our larger customers on the Quick platform actually started their journey with us in that outbound model. And they send anywhere between 1 and 3 outbound messages, keeping their customers apprised of the status of their order as it flows through that order management lifecycle. And they've seen customer satisfaction scores improve as a result of that. They've seen call deflection help pay for that service and actually improve the customer experience at the same time. And then there's the neat trick of, again, SMS messages get read. And so if you want to then send a follow-on promotion or a coupon code to those customers who have recently placed orders to see if you can assist them with a future order, you can then do that via SMS as well as part of those order lifecycle management notifications. And so you can actually drive revenue higher at the same time you're actually driving costs lower because you're deflecting those calls, but also delivering marketing material to them.
I suppose it's also possible that you get them accustomed to communicating with you via text messaging. So you could, even say at some point, hey, if you have any questions about installation or need help, you can always text us back at this number or whatever.
That's exactly right. And I think, giving customers that choice it really puts the control of the customer experience into the customer's hands, and it fits into their lifestyle, like I mentioned earlier, as opposed to being having a certain customer experience model dictated to you by a brand. And that's a very powerful thing. And those of us who have been in the space for 10, 15, 20 years have been looking for this channel, this mechanism that fits into the lifestyle of the customer, but also generates ROI for the brand. We've been looking for this for many years now. And it just so happens that messaging's been right at our fingertips for, I think SMS celebrated its 25th birthday recently. And so here it's been right in front of us all along. It just need to be reimagined a little bit in order to turn it into a viable customer experience channel.
Is there any concern with messaging that it's going to go the same way, in some sense, that email has? So we started early in this conversation. You talked about having an email that you use just for online orders, which you don't actually check regularly, and email response rates are relatively lower. Do you think, as more companies enter this space, that this is a real fear, or is that not the case with messaging?
I think it's something that those of us who are in this space and the brands that we've talked to are committed to stewardship of. And fortunately, we learned a lot of lessons from the email experience. That evolution that happened back in the 90s and early 2000s, where there was an explosion of innovation on the internet, meant that the governance of those things lagged behind. It was kind of like we didn't realize what we had created. The good news about messaging is, again, it's been around for 25 years now, and was enabled by established companies, the telecom companies, with regulation by the government. And so there is a nifty little thing called the TCPA that actually governs usage of SMS as a channel. And there are rigorous mechanisms for enforcement, and those of us who are in the space and enabling this or using messaging as a channel all have to comply with those regulations. And so a little bit of governance and a little bit of stewardship from the brands that are in the space, I think, will go a long way to help prevent texting or SMS from becoming the next email.
So the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, or the TCPA, what are some of the restrictions that are in there? Are there restrictions, for example, about who we send to or how often we send?
That's exactly right, Armando. The most notable thing the TCPA provides for is opting in. And to send somebody a text message in the context of business, they have to be opted in. There are various ways to opt into a text messaging conversation with a business. Explicit being the safest or the most robust way to comply with the TCPA. And so to have an explicit opt-in, somebody may have to come to your website, enter their mobile phone number, and you would display a message for them that says, entering your phone number here, by entering my phone number, I explicitly agree to receive text messages from this brand, right? And once they click the submit button, you're good to go. There are other explicit ways as well. For example, the consumer initiating a text message. And so if somebody goes to your mobile website and finds a clickable text us link and then sends you a message, they're opted in to continue that conversation with that brand. The other thing the TCPA provides for is is the ability for somebody to opt out, and the brand and the enabler of messaging needs to comply with that. And so the most recognizable form of that is when somebody replies stop to a message. That's a universally recognized hard opt-out that's enforced not only by us, but by the carriers as well. And so, again, there are multiple stages of enforcement and compliance here. And I think as long as we continue to be good stewards of the environment, we'll be in good shape.
So, Chris, I've kind of driven the conversation a little bit with my questions, just sort of open-ended. Are there other things that the listeners of this podcast should understand about SMS and text messaging?
Well, I think the big one is that I know that the listeners today are most interested in the e-commerce aspects of it, but what we see happening with the brands that we support is that full customer experience life cycles are moving to mobile devices. And so we can either, as companies, have to continue to invest in our own proprietary platforms. If you're a big company, that's a huge expense potentially, or we can start to figure out ways to leverage the native capabilities on some of these mobile devices. And that's where, again, messaging can play a huge role in augmenting your full support of that mobile customer experience life cycle. And so that then spawns over into customer experience. And or customer support in some cases. And so you get this full life cycle of support on a mobile device. And you're kind of right at your customer's fingertips or in their pocket or on their bedside table at all times. And that's very powerful. I mean, the other story I always tell people is I had a period in January where my mom was sick in the hospital. My wife was on a business trip. I had both boys, my kids, and our 3 dogs. And my water heater went out. And believe me, if you have 2 boys and 3 dogs, you need hot water. And I was actually able, sitting in my mom's hospital room, to purchase and schedule the installation of a new water heater over text messaging with a local plumbing company that's actually a quick customer. And so that full life cycle support is invaluable to people when they're dealing with real life events. And I'll forever be a customer of this plumbing company because they were able to do something for me at a time when it had to be done. And so subsequently, I've had multiple interactions with them over SMS for a variety of needs. It's been fantastic.
You know what? It's interesting to me as you tell that story that it also seems like once a customer has started to communicate with you over text messaging, you really have a loyalty channel that you've built with them. That might be the first place they turn when they have a question about a product or service that you handle.
It might be the first place they turn, or it might be a more convenient option for them, even though it's not the first place they turn. And, so to carry my story forward a little bit, my water heater was installed. And I realized a couple of weeks later that the city had never inspected it. And it turned out the inspections date had gotten jumbled. And so this is now 2 weeks after I'd actually completed the purchase of the water heater. I actually thought, well, it's going to be easier for me to call and talk to them about this. And so I placed a call to their number and ended up in their IVR, and their IVR reminded me, hey, we offer text messaging. And it just so happened that at that point I was walking into my office and needed to go into a meeting. And so I pressed 1 to move to text messaging, and I was able to work out the city inspection process over text messaging while I'm sitting in a work meeting. And so even though it wasn't the first place I turned, by offering that to me at the moment that I realized, oh, wait a second, this is going to be a better option, again, just reinforces that loyalty. It reinforces that brand that this plumbing company is willing to operate on my terms that are dictated by my lifestyle.
Chris, I want to thank you for taking time for this e-commerce conversation. It's been very interesting. I hope that some of the e-commerce owners and operators that are listening will be able to find or maybe even just go out and Google to learn more about texting and see if it will help them with their businesses.
Thanks, Armando. My pleasure.